our webinar is entitled The Face of Gideon, a conversation with public defenders and former clients. As you may know, this past Sunday, March 18th, marked the 55th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright, the landmark U.S. Supreme Court case that we can credit for creating the right to a public defender in state-level cases. The anniversary presents us an opportunity to reflect on what Gideon means, the impact of public defenders on the lives of their clients, and what improvements need to be made in order for the power of the Gideon decision to really be fully realized. So on your screen now, you can see the agenda for today's webinar. In addition to hearing from me, you'll hear from Genevieve Citron-Ray, Anton Johnson, and Patrice James. From 1 to 1:15, the phase we're in right now, we'll have an overview of the Gideon decision, and Genevieve will tell us more about the Right to Counsel campaign. From 1:15 to 1:45, we'll have a guided discussion panel during which the panelists will engage in a candid conversation about how the Gideon decision shapes the criminal justice experiences of accused people and the advocates who defend them. And then finally, from 1:45 to 2 o'clock, we'll have a question and answer period during which you, as our listeners, will have an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists. So with no further ado, we'll get into a discussion of the Gideon case. Next slide, please, Cameron. So Gideon versus Wainwright was the landmark 1963 United States Supreme Court case in which the court unanimously ruled that states are required under the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to provide attorneys to people accused of crimes who are unable to afford private lawyers. The case extended the constitutional right to counsel, which we all know, to the states. So how did we get here? Clarence Earl Gideon was arrested in Florida in 1961 for burglary. Mr. Gideon requested an attorney be assigned to him when he appeared in front of the judge, but his request was denied. As a result, he was forced to act as his own counsel at trial and conduct his own defense. He emphasized his innocence in the case, but at the conclusion of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict. At the time, there was actually nothing technically illegal about what happened. Under Betts v. Brady, states were not required to assign court-appointed attorneys in non-capital cases unless special circumstances were present. But Clarence Earl Gideon set out to change all that. From a cell in Florida State Prison, writing in pencil on prison stationery, Gideon appealed to the United States Supreme Court, filing a suit against the Secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections, Louis L. Wainwright. Gideon argued in his appeal that he had been denied counsel and therefore his Sixth Amendment rights, as applied to the states by the 14th Amendment, had been violated. On March 18, 1963, the Supreme Court decision was announced unanimously in favor of Gideon. Gideon v. Wainwright overruled Betts v. Brady, holding that the assistance of counsel, if desired by a defendant who could not afford to hire counsel, was a fundamental right under the U.S. Constitution. That right was binding on the states and essential for a fair trial and due process of law, regardless of the circumstances of the case. The decision actually did not directly result in Gideon being freed. Instead, he received a new trial with the appointment of defense counsel at the government's expense. During the new trial, Gideon's lawyer picked apart the testimony of the eyewitness and was able to track down a witness through investigation that further discredited the eyewitness. The jury acquitted Gideon after 1 hour of deliberation. Gideon died of cancer on January 18, 1972, at the age of 61. Gideon's headstone in Missouri is inscribed with a quote from a letter that Gideon wrote from prison. It says, "Each era finds an improvement in law for the benefit of mankind." After Gideon's case, about 2,000 individuals who have been convicted were freed in Florida alone as a result of the Gideon decision. The Gideon decision created and then ultimately expanded the need for public defenders, forever changing the representation of indigent defendants. But despite ongoing expansion, the public defender system in the United States is in crisis. In many cases, accused individuals are asked to waive the appointment of counsel. In other cases, attorneys don't get assigned until after important decisions have been made. In most criminal cases, the accused is brought before a judicial officer who decides whether or not he or she will be released, held on bail, or held without bail. In many jurisdictions across the country, poor people are not provided the assistance of counsel at that first appearance when the bail determination is being made. First to negotiate with prosecutors and judges for their own liberty, many people end up pleading guilty without the advice of a lawyer. Of those who do not plead guilty, many are held in jail and must wait for days or even weeks for an attorney to be assigned in their case. Then we have the situation where even in courts where public defenders are appointed at first appearance, that attorney is generally under severe time constraints and pressure to resolve cases, and accordingly has limited time and resources to devote to providing competent counsel. As a result, defenders are often unable to assess cases and properly advise their clients or represent their interests. I know from my perspective, before joining the Justice Programs Office, I practiced as a public defender at the Bronx Defenders, which is luckily one of the best and most well-resourced offices in the country. The office is holistic and sees every client as a human first. Holistic defense means that the client is seen as a whole person, not just a criminal case. The office seeks to provide clients with all services they need for the issues that led to and result from their involvement in the criminal justice system, including representation and advice from family court lawyers, immigration lawyers, and housing court attorneys. If needed, clients can be assigned a social worker, an investigator, and client advocate. But despite the incredible holistic resources of that office, I often felt overwhelmed by my caseload, and like I simply did not have enough time to give each client the defense they deserved. There was tremendous systemic pressure from judges and court personnel to move cases along quickly, to advise clients to plead guilty, and to ignore their humanity. When public defenders have so many cases that they are forced to choose between the depth of the representation they can provide and the number of clients that they are able to see, the judge in a given arraignment shift, justice is not served. That is not the spirit of Gideon. In many parts of the country, public defenders are working hard daily in spite of these competing pressures. The Right to Counsel National Campaign exists to raise awareness about their critical role and to change the way that the public understands the constitutional right to an attorney in criminal cases. Now we have Genevieve Citron-Ray here to talk us through all about the Right to Counsel National Campaign.
Thank you, Zoe, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. Hold on, it looks like there's a little bit of feedback. All right, thank you. So thanks again to everybody for joining us today. For those of you who might not know, I also came from a background of public defense, although unlike Zoe, I was not an attorney. I was an investigator for the Public Defender Service here in DC, and really kind of saw firsthand some of the challenges and the rewards of effective assistance of counsel. Like Zoe mentioned, the Right to Counsel National Campaign, or R2C as we like to call it, seeks to raise awareness about the constitutional right to counsel and the importance of effective public defense delivery systems. R2C officially launched in 2015, recognizing the variance across public defense systems and the need to raise awareness about the constitutional right itself, the challenges faced by public defense providers, and to highlight the power of effective representation. R2C is part of a cooperative agreement funded by the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. So goals of R2C are to raise public awareness nationally of the importance of providing skilled public defense services to criminal defendants who cannot afford a lawyer, to spearhead broad-based initiatives by policymakers in multiple sectors, both within and outside of the criminal justice system, to take appropriate action, and to develop a strategic vision of the role of public defense that policymakers and criminal justice leaders integrate in the operational conduct and planning of the functions of their respective agencies. R2C is comprised of a multidisciplinary group of consortium members, including defenders, prosecutors, law enforcement judges, legislators, funders, community advocates, impacted community members, court personnel, policymakers, corrections employees, and researchers. To make sustainable and comprehensive change, every system actor must play an active role in ensuring the right to counsel and effective public defense delivery systems. 55 years have passed since the landmark decision of Gideon, yet the promise of Gideon is yet to be reached. Gideon is only achieved when public defense providers have the time, resources, experiences, and compassion to devote to each person accused of a crime who faces a loss of liberty. Only then can there be effective defense representation. And when we say effective representation, this is exactly what we are talking about. So that leads us to our webinar today. Instead of focusing on what is not happening, we want to show you the power of what effective representation is. We hope to shed light on the true power of Gideon and inspire everyone to keep advocating for a fully funded and resourced public defense system that allows all individuals charged with a crime to receive effective representation as they deserve, and to continue to advocate for a criminal justice system that treats everyone with dignity and respect.
Thanks, Genevieve. So now it's time for our moderated discussion where our panelists will discuss how the Gideon decision shapes the criminal justice experience of accused people and the advocates who defend them. Genevieve will join the panel both in her capacity as the project director of the Right to Counsel National Campaign and also hearken on her experience as an investigator for the Public Defender Service here in DC. So I'll start with Patrice Amber James, who we are fortunate enough to have with us here today. Patrice is a career public defender, and she is also currently the Director of External Relations at Still She Rises. Patrice, what made you want to become a public defender?
I decided to be, well, first of all, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me. But I decided to become a public defender because of having lived through a family member get arrested, charged with a crime, and ultimately serve a 5-year prison sentence. And so I can remember going to visit this person in jail or in prison during the course of the 5 years. And that was just very formative for me, going to the visiting room, looking around and seeing a lot of people who looked like me, a lot of Black families in the visiting room. And that was when I realized that there was something wrong with our system. And so I decided to go to law school and become a public defender to fight against this system that is over-incarcerating people of color.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Patrice. We are so lucky to have both your personal and professional perspective added to the pool of dedicated public defenders. We are also lucky to have Anton Johnson with us here today. Anton is a lifelong resident of the DC metropolitan area who was valedictorian of his high school and earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Anton, as you know, part of our mission at the Right to Counsel National Campaign is to recognize each person whose life has been impacted by the criminal justice system as a person first. As impactful as that experience no doubt was for you, it was just one chapter in a much longer book of the story of your life. So please tell the listeners about you, about your life, and about what you're up to now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining. I'm a 33-year-old African-American male. I've been living in Washington, D.C. my entire life, and I currently am a network administrator and cybersecurity analyst for multiple companies, which includes the federal government and IBM, just to name a few. I strongly believe in the justice system. I strongly believe in the spirit of the ruling behind Gideon, and I want to make sure that I can do whatever I can to kind of give my experiences when it comes to being represented effectively. So that's just who I am.
Thank you, Anton, and we'll come back to you in a little bit to hear more about what those experiences were like for you. But before we do, I want to bring it back to Patrice. Patrice, you practice in 2 jurisdictions, Tulsa and the Bronx. How does the place you are practicing affect your role as a public defender? Are there differences in the way that the importance of assigned counsel is appreciated?
Absolutely. I think as you were saying in the beginning, there are certainly challenges that vary based on the jurisdiction that you are in. So right in New York City, in the Bronx where I practice, attorneys, public defenders were assigned to clients within 24 hours of arrest. And I think that's about as good as you're going to get when it comes to having assigned counsel. But where I am currently in Tulsa, public defenders are assigned approximately 7 to 8 days after arrest. So, and they are not assigned before there is a determination of bail. And so that is something that we are certainly not used to. It's something that we have been talking about a lot, both internally and externally, and really are pushing for arrest to arraignment times to be moved up and for a counsel to be assigned earlier. When there is the first initial appearance and charges are read and bail is determined, there's no one there to stand on behalf of the client, the person that's incarcerated, and that's a problem. In Tulsa, there is no bail hearing unless an attorney, a defense counsel, files a motion. So a lot of times you have people that are sitting in jail who are sitting in jail based off of a schedule amount, but has never had anyone fight or argue the bail terms or conditions. And that is certainly a problem and something we did not see in in the Bronx.
And Patrice, obviously many of the people on this webinar now appreciate why it's so important that have someone there to represent them when the bail determination is being made. But what's the counter argument that you're hearing in response when your office pushes for the opportunity to be represented at the bail hearing?
Well, there's not necessarily really. The pushback is that bail is set based off of a schedule, and it's the same for everyone, and everyone has the opportunity to post the bond, and there's no sort of bias, because if it's assault is a $10,000 bond, and it's $10,000 for everyone. So some folks don't really understand what the problem is, and obviously, or maybe not obviously, the problem is, right, the purpose of bail is purely to secure someone's return to court. And it shouldn't be based on a dollar amount. I think the numbers, statistics show that that's actually not what, having money on the line is not the single most determination of when a person's going to come back to court. But what the issue is in Tulsa is really just a matter of capacity of the courthouse and the way it's currently set up and structured. There's just not a place to have a bail hearing the way the procedure works here in Tulsa. So, what we have done as an office is the minute that we pick up a client, we automatically go to the courthouse and file a motion to get a hearing in front of the judge. And that's worked out pretty well, resulted in approximately 72% of our clients having either bond being reduced or clients being released on their own recognizance, which is great. But really the pushback is just, well, you go to a bondsman and the bondsman's only going to charge you 10%, so I really don't see what the problem is.
Wow, well, those are some really impressive results. Patrice, you referenced your office, and I know your office is Still She Rises. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Still She Rises and how it connects to the meaning of the Gideon decision?
Sure. So Still She Rises is the first holistic public defender office in the country that's dedicated to exclusively representing mothers in the criminal justice system. Oklahoma is the #1 incarcerator of women, and they have the highest incarceration rate of women. And obviously, it's, with most statistics, Black women, women of color being disproportionately impacted by those statistics. We believe that Gideon is being realized here is because we pride ourselves on being very zealous lawyers. Because we have sort of restrictions around the demographic that we accept as clients, we have lower caseloads, which allow us to fight really hard, both for our individual clients, but for also the systemic issues. Like I mentioned, the right to having a bail hearing and the delay between arrest and arraignment here in Tulsa are all things that we are working on. Additionally, what is new to us, coming down from New York City, is that in Oklahoma, it is written into the Oklahoma law, it is law here and written into the statute, that if you bail out, so if your bond is $10,000 and you go to a bondsman, your family goes to a bondsman with $1,000 and they bond their loved one out, you get bonded out, you then have lost your right to your public defender. And you are presumed to be able to afford a lawyer. So we are able to fill in the gaps, because if our clients bond out, or if there is a mother who needs a lawyer, we represent those women free of charge. So our clients, they bond out, they still have us as lawyers. So is Gideon being realized? Is Gideon holding true? Is it a Gideon decision holding true here in Tulsa? I would say no, because if you're able to get $500 together and bail yourself out of jail, you now need to come up with maybe $5,000 more to hire a lawyer. I have actually watched individuals have handcuffs placed on them and threaten to go to jail because they come to court without a lawyer. And you know, we call this a criminal justice system, but how is that just?
So well said. Thank you so much, Patrice. So I'd like to turn it back over to Anton. Anton, you have shared with me that you were represented by a few different public defenders. Tell us about those experiences and how your perspective on public defense changed after being assigned to Jason Downs, a former public defender at PBS, a well-resourced public defender office here in D.C.
Well, just a brief background on my particular situation. Jason Downs, who is a former public defender in the Washington, D.C. office, represented me in 2009 for a criminal case I had caught, and we went to trial. And so he represented me from the beginning to the end. We, through the motions hearing, the trials, we actually had 3 trials because we got 2 hung juries. And then I was taken to trial a 3rd time where I was convicted. Eventually my conviction was overturned by the appellate court. And I was in prison during that entire phase up to the appellate court overturning and reversing my conviction in 2013. And the definition that Genevieve, who was actually the investigator for my case, gives about the definition for effective representation, it's spot on. Time, resources, experience, and compassion. All of those qualities and characteristics were seen in Jason's work. It was seen in the work provided by Genevieve. Their ability to manage the time, their ability to utilize the resources that they had to their advantage. Most people that I knew of didn't have investigators working on their criminal cases, and I was happened to be blessed to be able to have that particular resource at my disposal. The compassion that Jason showed in seeing me as a human being, as a person, and not as a statistic or a number. One of the biggest issues that we see here in D.C. is the caseload. I mean, there's just too many cases being pushed onto the public defenders, and you know, when you have so much going on, that the system is just so messed up, where you have so much going on, it's hard to really weave through your caseloads, weave through the expectations or the deadlines and whatnot. And Jason, in my particular case, managed to figure out a way to actually weave through it. And so he was very, very effective representing me. He was well, what he did was he actually changed my whole perspective on not just the criminal justice system, but just on my life. He gave me a reason to actually want to be successful. He gave me a reason to want to, you know, not help with the recidivism rate, you know, that we have or that we see, especially here in the Washington, D.C. area. So pretty much him seeing me as a person, and not just seeing me as a person, but fighting for me and representing me in the court system changed me, and I was able to actually believe that we actually can have effective representation in this system.
Wow, what a powerful experience, and so well put, Anton. It strikes me that I'm so glad that you had Jason there fighting for you, but we shouldn't be at a point where it takes the heroism of people who go above and beyond. The entire system should be ensuring that there are Jasons everywhere for Antons everywhere. But that being said, you did mention that as part of your case, you were assigned both an attorney and an investigator, Genevieve. Tell us about the impact of having both a lawyer and an investigator working on your behalf.
Oh, it completely changes the game in terms of your ability to actually fight. Too many times we have people who, and not everybody who gets arrested is innocent, and a lot of times it's really not about guilt or innocence. And again, this is me speaking from the perspective of individuals who are incarcerated versus me being where I am or who I am today. A lot of the times the arguments that we have is, as defendants, is, okay, yeah, I may have committed this particular crime, and I'm not talking about me, but I may have committed this particular crime, but how they went about arresting me, or how law enforcement went about charging me, somewhere along the line, something had to be illegal. Somewhere along the line, my constitutional rights had to have been violated. And so a lot of times what we are arguing for or pushing for is for those particular accusations or allegations of a violation of our constitutional rights to be investigated. And in order for that to happen, well, you have to have somebody who, not just an attorney, but the attorney has to have an investigator to assist them. And so, you know, by me having an investigator assigned to my case, it changed the whole game. It changed, it gave Jason the ability to not just focus on my case, but to focus on other people's cases and to, you know, manage his time accordingly. So, you know, for me, having Genevieve being there to do the investigation on my case, it gave me a fighting chance.
Absolutely. And we have someone else here who can speak to that experience. So, Genevieve, tell us about the experience and the connection you see between the Gideon decision and the role of investigators and other non-attorney staff and advocates in public defender offices.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Anton, for those kind words. And I must just say that in my new role doing policy work, it is really one of my highlights has been reconnecting with Anton over these past couple of months. And just, you know, chatting and seeing how well you are doing now is just really, it's really an honor. And yeah, I think, you know, Anton, you nailed it, and so did Zoe when you mentioned that Gideon is beyond just the attorney in a courtroom. There are so many things that go into preparing for court or having the information stand up and understand both the case and the person, and recognize that the case isn't the person isn't the case. And, attorneys, their skills are different than going out and collecting all the information and being out there investigating in the field. And without having individuals with the time and the skill set to devote to both the courtroom and, the litigation of cases on behalf of their clients, and without having people going out and investigating the cases and learning more about different players and, who your client actually is, there is absolutely no way that Gideon can be fulfilled with only one of those two things. And like I said, I think so many times Gideon is just seen as the person in the courtroom, but there are a lot of other players. There's support staff, there's law clerks, there's social workers, that all really play critical roles into providing effective representation.
Great, thanks, Genevieve. It's so true that it really does take a village, and public defense is not only about attorneys, and it's not only about what happens in the courtroom. With that, I'll turn it over to Patrice for one last question. Patrice, in what ways do you think the Gideon decision is alive, and what needs to change for it to be more completely fulfilled?
Yeah, I think it's alive, and I'm reminded of it being alive when I have opportunities like this to talk about the work, and that there is a space to talk about the work. I'm reminded when I see and I talk to my public defender friends across the country, and listen to their stories about their fights, and when I see my colleagues, or I'm at conferences and I'm surrounded by public defenders that are dedicated, that are constantly figuring out how to navigate the systems, how to be better for their clients, and when I listen to clients' stories, I do think that there is evidence that Gideon is alive in many places, and that many people are trying to make sure that it stays alive. But in terms of where obviously New York City, where I grew up, as I like to say, where I grew up in public defense, is a really well-resourced place. Coming to Tulsa, though, it really opened my eyes, and of course I heard stories, and I know folks that practice in the South, and know their challenges are very different than what we faced in New York City. And coming to Tulsa has definitely shown me firsthand the challenges that smaller jurisdictions and rural cities and rural counties are with the challenges that they are facing. Some of these places are not well resourced. Salaries are extremely low. The ability to hire experts, the ability to retain people in some of these offices is really hard. And so while I am so grateful and thankful to all the folks and organizations that are working in some of the major cities, we really have to look at some of these southern states, some of these more rural counties, and see what's happening, because there are people there that are in need of help. There are public defender offices that are really well-intentioned, that want to provide strong advocacy for their clients, but just don't have the resources or means to do so. And so while I think it's great that we keep focusing on some of the major cities, we really have to focus on some of these smaller places, because people are going to prison, and they're going to prison for a long time. It's not uncommon here in Tulsa to hear people getting life sentences or going to prisons for 30 and 40 years. That actually feels kind of common to me at this point, and I've only been here a year and a half. So there's a lot of work to do, but we should also consider focusing some in some of the more rural places.
Yes, that's such an excellent point, Patrice. One conversation we've been having over here at the Justice Programs Office a lot is the issue of training and access to training. I know I've talked to Genevieve about her experience of of training as an investigator. What was that like for you, and what challenges were there, Genevieve?
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, so it's true, you know, I was really lucky to be at an office where we had, you know, a lot of resources, which is very unusual, and I quickly actually learned how unusual it was. But it's so, the time pressure, well, I don't know how to even solve that. There's just, it's such a time suck, and you're so devoted to each and every case that it really is hard to pull yourself away and say, hey, actually, I need to go attend this training. I need to make sure that I'm up to speed on all of these, you know, newer things coming in. But it's also, it really is so important and so critical. And so I think when we talk about time for cases, it's something that can't be overlooked, and there really needs to be, you know, time to attend trainings and to get the experience and make sure that everybody from non-attorneys to attorneys are, you know, aware of the latest research and the latest trends, that they're really able to kind of take advantage of that, because through that you will be able to, you know, even be a better advocate for your clients. But it is really hard in the day-to-day to see that and to kind of step aside for a little bit to go and get that training, but it's definitely something that needs to be talked about and needs to be built in.
Yeah, that's such an important perspective, you know, in offices where, in jurisdictions where training is incredibly important, making the time to attend those trainings when they're available. Patrice, what is it like in more rural jurisdictions like Tulsa? Are there trainings available to public defenders?
Hello? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. So since we have been here, since I have been here, I have not heard of very many trainings, and I don't believe that the public defender's office has any sort of ongoing or robust training program, and that's something that we certainly have been talking about, and I believe this spring we are going to partner with the public defender office and actually host a training, both for our lawyers and the lawyers at the public defender's office here in Tulsa, because training is such an issue. I mean, time is of course one thing, but again, it comes down to resources. I mean, some of these offices barely have the resources to pay their attorneys and their staff, you know, sort of livable wages, let alone then sending attorneys to trainings or paying to bring trainers into their offices. That's a real problem. It's a real problem when you have attorneys that are coming fresh out of law school or have only, you know, been practicing for a year or two, and now we're handling cases where people are facing upwards of life in prison. That is something that we are seeing here, and so again, like you have been saying all along, is, you know, is Gideon actually coming to fruition in places like this when these are the conditions that attorneys are working under and clients are being represented under. So, you know, we are again pretty lucky that we are able to send our attorneys to the national trainings, and we are able to bring in training here, bring a training here to Tulsa, but we aren't uniquely situated. And so it is certainly an issue and one that we are navigating here.
And thank you, Patrice. Is that government funding with which you're able to send your attorneys and advocates to trainings, or is it other funding?
Right. So Still She Rises is 100% privately funded through various grants, with our main grantor being the George Kaiser Family Foundation, which allows us to operate and provide a certain level and standard of practice. But, you know, I am not sure how much of the public defender's office, what % of their budget comes from the state. I'm sure it's all completely state funded, but, you know, one of the things, fines and fees are a big issue here in Tulsa. Our clients walk away owing thousands of dollars of fines to the court systems here. And the DA's office, they try to justify the amount of fines and fees that they ask for per case by saying, well, the state only gives us 40% of our budget, so I have to now make up 60% of my budget. And how am I going to do that? How do I do that? On the backs of your clients. One interesting thing is where we represent mothers that live in North Tulsa, which is the historically Black community in Tulsa, and also in North Tulsa, 2 of the poorest zip codes in the city of Tulsa are in North Tulsa and are the 2 of our main zip codes where we represent mothers. Recently, there was a study done that showed the 2 poorest zip codes in Tulsa actually pay the most money in fines and fees to the courthouse. And so you have the poorest people in the city paying the most money to the court systems, which includes the public defender, which includes the DA's office. So they are literally supporting the office, these offices, and that's the problem. Clients literally pay for everything. Clients pay for $25 to fill out a pauper's affidavit, which will then allow the judge to determine if they qualify for a public defender. If they file a motion, there's a cost associated to that. There's limited money for experts through the courts. So it is, everyone is working on a minimal budget, but it's actually our clients that are suffering the most and are actually paying for everything. And so there's no shortage of struggle or problem here in Tulsa.
Yeah, that much is clear, and thank goodness for the external private funding that's available. It's a reminder that foundations can play such a key role in subsidizing the public defense system until we're able to have it be up to snuff with what the Gideon decision promised. Well, with that, it is now 1:48, so we can transition over to our question and answer period, in which the listeners can type in their questions in the question and answer box. You can direct it either directly to the host or to all the panelists, and we will read out the questions and have our panelists answer them. So Anton, we got a question for you asking if there is one thing that the listeners could take away with them today, or one thing that you would like them to know about you, what would it be?
Give me a few seconds. Let me think about that one.
No worries. Take your time. We have it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Great. Go for it.
We all make choices in life, and for every choice that we make, there's always going to be a consequence. Consequence can be good, consequence could be bad. The biggest thing for me is learning to take responsibility. And that what I mean by that is taking responsibility for the choices that we make as individuals, and being willing to accept or deal with the consequences that follow. And that doesn't even necessarily mean committing a crime or anything, but just having a sense and a duty of being responsible to yourself and to those who are around you. Because when you do make choices, when you do make decisions, they don't just affect you. I'm grateful for everybody who joins the public defender's office, because a lot of them already go in knowing that the system is stacked against them, and yet they still go in and they still work, as we have with some of the panelists who work in the public defender's office or had previously worked in and continue to do the work of it. So I'm grateful for everybody who goes into the situations and try to make a change. But for me, it's also about being responsible and taking responsibilities for your actions. So if you want to, if I can leave you all with anything, it's that. We should all be willing to take responsibility for our actions and the consequences that follow.
Thank you, Anton. And as a former public defender, I think I have the permission to say that on behalf of many public defenders, that I think a lot of public defenders get involved in the work because it's really all about the clients. And so while the odds are stacked against public defenders when they enter the courtroom, they are so much more stacked against the clients themselves. And that is why so many public defenders do the work, because of the ways that the criminal justice system makes it very hard for people who are accused to actually achieve justice. All right, I think we have time for one more question. If someone wants to type it in, we will wait for that. All right, well, it looks like we have not received any other questions. So in absence of that, I'll just open it up to Patrice and Anton. Do you have any closing words or anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think it's just for people that are engaged in the fight and or interested in the fight, keep the fight alive. It's extremely important and powerful that we keep sharing our clients' stories and telling people what is happening to people. You turn on the news, you turn on the TV, and so it's such a one-sided story that is given about our legal system, and it's not showing just how the legal system is destroying people's lives and destroying communities, especially our most vulnerable people in our most vulnerable communities. And we have to keep fighting against the system because people deserve it. It is deserved. So I thank everyone that's engaged in this. And thank you for having me, Zoe and Genevieve.
Yeah, of course. Well said, Patrice. Anton, any closing words?
Well, thank you all for having me as well and for allowing me to be a part of this panel. Just remember, effective representation is possible. I've experienced it. I've lived it. The Gideon decision, the spirit of Gideon is still alive and well as long as we have individuals like people on the right to counsel who's willing to fight for and advocate on behalf of the clients and defendants. And so we just got to keep that movement going, like Patrice said. So thank you.
Thank you, Anton, for closing us out on a message of hope. Our goal on this webinar was really to shed light on what is happening in the public defense system, what is going well, what needs to change, what does the face of Gideon look like now, both for clients who are in the system and the attorneys who represent them. And Anton, Genevieve, and Patrice all did such justice to that mission. So thank you all so much. If you have any questions about the Right to Counsel campaign, feel free to reach out to Genevieve or me. please feel free to also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and be loud and proud on social media about your support for the right to counsel. Thank you again, everyone, and please join us for our next webinar on June 20th, when we'll be talking about technological innovations to support public defenders and their clients. Thanks again. Bye-bye.